Everybody, thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And before we get into tonight's event, I wanted to do just some general store announcement stuff, let you guys know what is going on. If you got our email newsletter yesterday, you will know we had a handful of events on the calendar for September in store. We were super excited to get back to being able to host at least a few authors this year, but we have canceled all of those. We just don't feel it's safe with COVID numbers in Texas and in Houston to try to do some in-store stuff. But we are open for browsing. We are now requiring masks back in the store again. Previously, we were just encouraging them, but now we're requiring them. So we hope that you will come see us. If you are not getting out and about, again, we're still doing curbside pickup, so you can always give us a call. We're happy to run books out to the car for you. If you do get the email newsletter, we'll be sending out another one tomorrow that'll have a little bit more specifics about what's happening with the in-store stuff. Some of it's pivoted to virtual. It's all pivoted to virtual, but it's kind of specifics on that. Also wanted to mention real quick, if you guys are fans of Paula Hawkins, you might know her from Girl on the Train and Into the Water. She has a new book coming out at the end of the month, but this Saturday at 1 o'clock, next Saturday at 1 o'clock, we're going to be doing a virtual event with her in conversation with Lee Child. It's a ticketed event, so if you visit murderbooks.com, you will be able to get some info about that. We have all kinds of stuff coming up, so definitely check out the website to see what we've got going on. But tonight, we're super excited to have Abby Endler with Crime by the Book with us. We always love doing stuff with Abby. She's going to be chatting with Seraphina Nova Glass and Amber Garza about their new books. So I'm going to get everybody introduced and bring them out and get us started. So we are going to start with Seraphina. How are you tonight?
Wonderful. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Seraphina's newest release is Such a Good Wife, which came out on August 10th. And we do have signed book plates to go with both authors' books. So if you order either one, you'll get a signed book plate with it. So Seraphina is a professor and playwright-in-residence at the University of Texas, Arlington, where she teaches film studies and playwriting. She holds an MFA in playwriting from Smith College, and she's also a screenwriter and an award-winning playwright. Seraphina has traveled the world using theater and film as a teaching tool, living in South Africa, Guam, and Kenya as a volunteer teacher, AIDS relief worker, and documentary filmmaker. As I mentioned, her newest release is Such a Good Wife. And next we have Amber Garza. How are you tonight, Amber?
Hi, good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Amber's release, Where I Left Her, is going to be out on Tuesday, so you can pre-order that. And Amber has had a passion for the written word since she was a child, making books out of notebook paper and staples. Her hobbies include reading and singing. Coffee and wine are her drinks of choice, not necessarily in that order. She writes while blaring music and talks about her characters like they're real people. She lives with her husband and 2 kids in Folsom, California. And we're super excited to have her tonight. As I said, her new book is Where I Left Her, and that will be out on Tuesday. And we're also excited to have Abby Endler with us tonight. How are you tonight, Abby?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's so good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for letting me join in this conversation. I'm so excited to chat with Seraphina and Amber.
We're always happy to have you on board. So for those of you who don't know, Abby runs the amazing Crime by the Book blog and also Instagram. She does really great movie nights. She does, if you ever want to know what it's like to kind of work in publishing, to be a bookstagrammer, you should definitely check out her Instagram page. And she also gives some of the best crime recommendations too. She gives the best crime recommendations, not some of the best. So as I mentioned, she is the creator of Crime by the Book, which is a crime fiction review website and Instagram account. And by day, she is a publicist for a division of Penguin Random House. So I get the joy of getting to know her as a bookstagrammer, and also I get to work with her behind the scenes as a publicist on stuff too. So as I said, we're always super excited to have Abby on board when we're doing stuff. So while they are chatting this evening, if you guys have questions for either of our authors, you can post those in the comments on Facebook or the live chat on YouTube, and we will get to those in a bit. But for now, I'm going to turn the talk over to Abby, and I will see you guys in just a little bit.
Thank you so much, John. Seraphina, Amber, it's so nice to see you. Thank you again for letting me join you this evening. I had such a great time getting ready for this event and reading both of your books. And I've got so many questions for both of you, but I thought maybe to kick things off, maybe we could just learn a little bit more about your backgrounds. I think we just heard from John's introduction. Both of you have such different but very fascinating backgrounds that you bring to your new stories. So Seraphina, I thought maybe you could kick us off and just tell us a little bit about, what you you were doing prior to writing thrillers and how you found your way into the thriller genre.
Yeah, it was a sudden entry to the thriller genre. My background, like you were saying, was in playwriting mostly, and then I guess in the last like 4 or 5 years, I sort of discovered screenwriting, and I was, of all things, writing Hallmark movies and optioning sort of Hallmark romance Christmas movies.
Amazing.
And so I was actually directing a show at the university where I teach now, and it's a little bit of a distance. I mostly teach online, and I had to commute a lot. And so I listened to my first audiobook and also my first thriller, and I think it was Ruth Ware. And I finished it right when the show was closing, and I said, I want to do that. And so I started a book right away. It was October, I remember, and I finished it by December, around Christmas. And I was mad because I had to wait to send it out till after the holidays. So I sent it out in January and signed with Folio a couple weeks later. And then a few weeks after that, we got a multi-book deal with HarperCollins. And it's all very still surreal, even a few years later. I'm just...
That's incredible. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that.
I love it more than, I love all the other genres, but thrillers just kind of got my heart, and I'm really enjoying it.
I love it. That's amazing. And Amber, I know that you had kind of a whole other career writing other kinds of books before you turned to thrillers. Could you share a little bit about your background and how you've come to thrillers now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I always loved mystery novels. Like that was my thing growing up, Nancy Drew, and then I went into Mary Higgins Clark. But when I started self-publishing, I just kind of landed in the young adult genre. My kids were that age, and I just found like a fan base that way. And so I was writing young adult romance. But I always wanted to write thrillers. Like I would do it on the side for fun. And then back in 2018, I was kind of at a crossroads of deciding, like, income wise, I wasn't doing great with my writing. And so I had to make a choice. Like, do I want to keep doing this and think of it as a hobby, or do I want this to be my career? So I had this idea for When I Was You for like 10 years. And so I finally said, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to write this book, and I'll give myself a year to see if I could get a big 5 publisher. And kind of like you, Seraphina, I started pitching in January, and by February I signed with my agent, and by April the book had gone to auction in the US and the UK. So, and it was like 15 years in the making, but then everything happened so fast, and it felt so amazing and wonderful. And I'm like you, I still pinch myself, like I still can't believe that this is happening and this is my career, and I hope it never gets old. I hope it
you just gonna wake up and drink coffee and figure out how to murder people, and that's your job, and it's just like the best.
That's incredible. I love it. That's amazing. Well, we are chatting this evening because both of you have new books out this month. And before we get any further in this conversation, I would love if you could tell us in your own words what your new books are about. And Amber, I thought maybe I could put you on the spot to start with this one. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Where I Left Her, which will be out this coming Tuesday.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you really quickly how I came up with it, because it's the whole premise. So back when my daughter was 13 years old, I went to drop her off at a friend's house. And it was a friend I'd been to before, so I didn't walk her up to the door. I watched her walk inside. And I went back a few hours later to pick her up, and an elderly woman answered the door and was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, your daughter's not here. And I freaked out for a minute, and then I looked around and realized I was at the wrong house. And so I apologized, and I had gone just over one street. It was all tract homes that looked the same. But by the time I went to get my daughter, I was like, I picked her up and I said, Kayleen, I have the best idea for a book. And so that was how it was born. So it's a mom who drops her daughter off at a new friend's, and it's a little bit different because she hadn't been there before. She drops her off, goes back to pick her up the next day, and an elderly woman answers the door and has no idea what she's talking about. The difference is she really thinks she is at the right house, whereas my daughter was where I left her. Amelia maybe is not. So.
Amazing. It's the kind of plot that you hear about it, you just immediately need to dig into the story. It's so immediately creepy and compelling, and I loved the read so much. And Seraphina, you're welcome. I'm going to put you on the spot next to tell us a little bit about Such a Good Wife, which was just released last week.
You mean the idea or just what it's about?
Maybe what it's about to kick us off, and then you can share a little bit about where you got the idea too.
So it's about a woman who has an affair, and her lover ends up dead. And, you know, a lot of it's about the lengths she goes to distance herself from ever having known him, not just so her family doesn't find out at first, but subsequently so she doesn't get, you know, arrested for murder or, you know, become suspect herself. And the lies really start to snowball into a lot of bad decision making and kind of becomes life or death, you know, at some point, without giving any spoilers away.
And was there a particular moment for you where you kind of had that light bulb moment that gave birth to this novel?
No, it's never, every time somebody asks me that, I'm like, that's probably why I clarified. I never have a good answer. I don't have any divine inspiration. I think I just really just kind of piece and sew nuggets of ideas together until it kind of forms into something that starts to make sense, you know, and it's a lot of thinking about plot until I guess at some point you have an aha moment. I really thought about how well do you know somebody as a question throughout the process, but there was no divine inspiration that sparked it. You have a way better story, Amber.
No, but that's something that I think is so interesting for us readers, you know, because like I'm not a novelist. I don't know what that process is like to become inspired and have that idea. So I think it's so interesting to hear that such different experiences, you know, can result in great, gripping, thrilling crime stories. And when I was thinking about these books, you know, obviously I think one of the similarities that jumped out to me right away is that both of these books center around protagonists who are mothers. They're in that mother figure role. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about why it was important to you to center both of your stories around, you know, women who are mothers. And Seraphina, maybe you could kick us off with this one.
I am not a mother. And I think that part of it was just really wanting her to be, I think what I love about domestic thrillers in particular is just the relatability. And I think most women probably are mothers and just have this family and it gives her more to lose, I think also. And just that she's just like everybody else and she's a caretaker and a wife and a mother and she loves her life. And she's just somebody you can connect to because you can really see yourself reflected in her. And I think motherhood kind of, I guess, made her a little bit more sympathetic, even though she was kind of a jackass a lot of the time.
Absolutely. And Amber, what about you?
I think with motherhood, I think it just lends itself so well to thrillers because it's such an intense relationship. And I think that like the way a mom feels about her child can very easily lend itself to some madness, you know? And so for me, I can connect to that a lot in the thrillers. I can kind of take my brain there of like, oh, this could go, you know, she could be like this or this could happen. Yeah. It gives me a lot of ideas. So yeah, I think that that's why I like to write about the motherhood aspect of it.
Yeah.
I also like to explore my own fears, I think, in writing just in general. And so I like to kind of play on the page with my fears as a mom and kind of leave them there. It just is very therapeutic for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, I mean, both of the protagonists, again, we're going to keep this spoiler free. Both of your protagonists go through some dark stuff. They do some twisted things in these books, which I loved reading. And I think that sometimes readers maybe assume that, you know, an author is like drawing on their own life when they're writing their characters. So I'm curious, I mean, how much of yourselves do you see in your protagonists? And I will leave this to whichever of you would like to answer first.
You want to go, Seraphina?
I always joke that everybody calls my protagonists unlikable. That's a word I hear a lot. The protagonist is very unlikable in reviews. And I've embraced that as like not a bad thing because that means they're interesting and flawed and messed up. And I mean, I think writing a lot in first person too, you do kind of hear your own voice and you start to think, how would I, you know, in a real life situation, I want to, you know, the protagonist to make decisions that seem, although maybe insane, because she's in insane circumstances, like something you might do if you're feeling desperate. And so I don't have, you know, real life experience to draw on as far as murder. And I always say that I'll probably get arrested one of these days because of my search history on Google. I do have to look a lot of it up, but, you know, whatever the imagination, you know, the limits are really just your imagination. But I think that once I do put the protagonist in this, you know, very precarious situation and throw rocks at them, really, I do kind of think about what would I do realistically in that situation. And that informs some of what they do. Hopefully not all of it.
Yeah, I think for me, I have to connect to something with my characters in order to get into the character. So I'll always pick something about myself, like I am an overprotective mom, or I was. My kids are adults now, but and so I kind of would say, okay, like Whitney will be overprotective, and then I just kind of try to amp it up. Like,
Yeah.
I just keep ramping it up until it's like not really like me, but I took something that I could relate to, and then almost played with if I was a different type of person, or if I was this much more intense than that. I also kind of like having my characters be a lot different than me. I'm kind of known as being very likable and very friendly, which I think being in the workplace and stuff, women are supposed to be smiley and friendly and happy and nice. Nothing's wrong with that, but I love to play with female characters that are just more badasses, and just more okay with however they're feeling and just being that person. I think for me that it's really fun to play on the page that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a reader, that's something I always gravitate towards are those, as Seraphina said, those unlikable characters, because they have so much complexity. And I love exploring those dark corners of these people. And I think you both do that so well with your protagonists in your books. And Seraphina, this next question is just for you, because I have a special place in my heart for crime novels that involve writers or involve books in some way. And I was so excited to find that in your book, a lot of it is actually facilitated by a writing group at a bookstore. And I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about why you wanted to include that kind of bookish element in your new thriller.
I feel like I know so many people who have a book in them, and they always, just about everybody I know, talks about wanting to write a book someday. I don't know the many people who kind of stop everything to actually do it. But I have been a part of these writers groups, and I feel like what Melanie, the main character, gave up is potentially a career in writing. And I don't know, maybe it was kind of a personal choice that giving that up seems like such a, I guess it would be so burdensome to think that you could have had this life. And not just the writer that the guy that she ends up falling in love with is, but his world travels and his sort of just this unattainable sort of flashy life, and it hit home more what she's maybe lost or what was taken from her by the decision she made. So I think that was a personal touch for me. Maybe it would have been writing. Part of me wishes I'd pursued it a lot younger, part of me, So, and I kind of like that. I've been in those bookstores where the writing group in the back is getting mad at the loud noises that the barista's making over here. And it just seemed kind of like a fun element to add.
Absolutely. I mean, I loved it. And I felt like I was right there with these characters. Like I knew this exact scenario. It was so great. I loved it. And Amber, in your book, as you kind of alluded to, you delve into the secrets that a teenage daughter is keeping from her mother. And I was really interested in, why that was interesting to you, especially when it comes to some of the stuff you include about, like Finstas, fake Instagram accounts, all these different like weird pockets of, this makes me sound like old, but like teenage subculture, I would say, where like when I was growing up, we didn't have Finstas. I didn't even know what that was until my little brother told me about it. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to, that universe, why it interested you to explore that side of things.
Yeah, so I actually found out my daughter had a Finsta a few years back. And so when I found this out, it's really funny. So she would use my phone for a couple of her Instagram accounts. And so I found out she had a Finsta. I kept trying to friend it. She wouldn't let me friend her. And so I was like, at first I was like, well, then you're not allowed to have it. But then I found out she was still having it. So it just kind of was this back and forth with us. And then when she turned 18, I found it again. And now she was too old for me to say, you can't have it. But I really wanted to know what was on there. And so I went back to where she used to like be in my phone with other Instagram accounts that she had like let go over the years. And in one of them, she followed that account. So for like 2 months, I was able to stalk that account. And I looked at it like every day and she didn't know. And actually what's so funny about it is nothing was offensive. It was a beautiful, empowering account. I just think she wanted to have it for herself. Yeah. But eventually I slipped up and I said something I shouldn't have known. And she was like, where'd you find that out? Were you on my Insta? And then she deleted the thing on my phone. So I never could see it again. But that's what gave me the idea in the book, realizing like, oh, these kids really do have these lives. Like, I've always been super involved in my kids' lives. They tell me a lot of things. I was surprised that she was keeping something that large from me. And so I just thought that lent itself really well to like, if a child went missing, how much would we find out as we delve into their life? Because they do want to have their own things. And it's so easy now with social media and our phones for them to have these secret lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, both of your books in their own ways, I think can safely be categorized in the domestic thriller space, which I know is a category that I love. So many readers, it feels like we can't get enough of it. And I would love to hear from both of you as writers. Do you have any theories as to, why people keep coming back to this genre, why it is so popular? And or, can you speak a little bit to why you yourself keep coming back to it as authors? And I will let either of you take this one away.
Well, I made Seraphina go first, so I'll go. Yeah, I think it's because it's so relatable. I think like for me, I live in suburbia, so I love reading the books that kind of flip suburbia around or like have premises that feel relatable to me, where I'm like, oh, this could be happening in my own neighborhood. And so for me, it's an easy genre to write because I can put myself there. And then it's an easy genre to read because it's so relatable. And I think that's probably why people enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this exactly the same. And it's my favorite genre to read as well as to write. I devour domestic thrillers. And it's the same, I just feel like you can really see yourself reflected in these characters, like she said, and it's fun to build a story around these kind of unthinkable things happening to your everyday person. Because if you start off in a post-apocalyptic setting, you kind of expect these things to happen, but there's just something kind of special. I always say sort of intimate about writing a domestic thriller genre because it's it feels like it could just happen to you at any time. And I think then you really think about each decision the character makes and how you almost scrutinize more, would I do that because you could see maybe yourself getting into these predicaments, right? And I think as a writer, you have to, you can't go over the top in maybe we do a little bit in, how they react, a snowball effect happens, because, you kind of have to think about the reader really saying, oh, I wouldn't do that. That's too much. And I think that's just so much fun. I just, I have a great time thinking about all the terrible things that can happen after one that just, and that's a lot of these books are like that. And it's delightful.
It is. It's totally delightful. And something that I know that I love so much about this genre is exactly what you're saying, Seraphina, where it's like, if you can get the reader to buy into all these really relatable elements, when you do push your character to do something twisted, the reader goes right along with you. And I know that's how I felt when I got to the reveals in both of your books, which again, no spoilers, but it's like you fully buy into it because it is so relatable. The rest of the story built around that is so relatable. Now, this might be a little bit of an odd question, but actually, Seraphina, hearing about your background writing for Hallmark movies, maybe not as odd as I was originally thinking. Both of your books, I think, have little elements of romance to them. And I know, Amber, you've written some novels with romance in the past. I was curious to hear from both of you. How do you approach finding that balance between keeping it a true, psychological thriller with these romantic elements? Because I think that you both strike a great balance in these books. And Seraphina, I wonder if you could kind of share with us a little bit about how you approached that, if that was something that you were kind of really cognizant of while you were writing.
I think I had a professor once tell me every story is a love story. And I like that because it, the romance just really brings a juicier element to it. I mean, we all can put ourselves in a situation of unrequited love or feeling cheated on or feeling betrayed, infidelity and deceit and all of that. It gives it this juicy, sink your teeth into level that I think just heightens whatever crime and all the other kind of things going on in the thriller. So I just kind of like to add it because it gives it a layer that I don't use it all the time, the romance. Yeah. But I just think it's something to kind of relate to even more in a character who hasn't felt betrayed and who hasn't had secrets. And I think it's a way to hook the reader in a juicy way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's fun. It's fun to write.
Yeah.
And Amber, I know your book, I think I would say had a little bit less of the romantic side of things, but there still was, relationships. And I would love to hear from you as well on this.
Yeah, well, I think for me, I don't know if I ever really think about like, oh, if I'll add romance to it, or if I'll be like, I think I look at it more like it adds a messy element. Like relationships are messy, and especially relationships like love relationships, or with your partner or whatever. And so I feel like it does add like another layer of like messiness, sometimes a red herring. Like it can add like this other piece that like gives the reader something, another direction to go. And I think it also gives the characters that are in this, it helps you kind of connect to them, because you're feeling this, whatever they're feeling towards this person, and whatever messiness comes out of it, they're along for that ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And Seraphina, I mean, knowing that you have a background in screenwriting, do you feel like there was anything from that background that you have brought with you into writing your thrillers? Because I think your books have this compulsively readable kind of quality that I just wonder, do you feel like that's something that you've drawn on in your thriller writing?
I feel like writing books is so much easier than writing a play, because you think about having to hold an audience for 2 hours with nothing blowing up and not like tons of quick scene changes and nobody's inner monologue. It's so much harder and so I was saying this once before, I tell my students being trained as a playwright is like classical training in a sense, because I feel like everything, after that, there's more freedom in. I can discuss, I can sort of describe every last detail of what's, somebody's feeling, what somebody's going through. A script doesn't have that. And also it's so collaborative. Once you write it, you have directors and actors and designers and, all sorts of people interpreting, your story and making it something really different than what you started with. And the control you have writing a novel is different than that. And they're all, sort of wonderful in their own right. But I found that just the practice of writing dialogue and trying to keep interest, and now I get to not only have the freedom of, control of the whole story, I have the thriller element because I wasn't writing thrillers before. It made it a really exciting kind of career switch or sort of medium switch for me. So I definitely brought that with. And I have to say, writing novels is so fun. I love it.
It's awesome. That's amazing. And Amber, I'm curious to know, with your background writing young adult books, your new book does have a lot of teenage relationships. I think you do an amazing job of portraying, a teenager's perspective and worldview and what those messy friendships and complicated friendships are like. Do you feel like you've drawn on, what you've written in the past in your new book?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, the teen years are so interesting because they're so formative. It's such a short period of time, and yet it really does, it's such a formative time, and it really does change who we are, or, like you say, coming of age, because it really does kind of lend itself to who you become as an adult. And also just the ages of my kids and watching my kids grow up, and they're 19 and 22 right now. So those ages really feel relatable to me, and watching the things they go through. So yeah, I think I probably did pull some of that from my experiences writing young adult stuff. And I do enjoy writing that age group. Yeah. And it was fun to put it into an adult novel. So it has that adult bent, but yet I was able to kind of still go into that age range.
Yeah, well, you did a fantastic job with it. I absolutely loved that aspect of the story. And
thank you.
Both of these books, I think I read both of these books in 2 sittings. They are compulsively readable. I have a term, I call them popcorn thrillers, where you just want to consume it. Both of these books completely fit that category. I'm curious, as writers, is that something that you're actively trying to cultivate, or do you feel like that's just something that naturally flows, with the story that you're trying to tell?
I think about it a lot. One person will call it a slow burn, and the next person will call it a page turn. You can't worry about how.
Yeah.
I always mean for each chapter, knowing in advance sort of that there's that element that it's going to end on a cliffhanger. I think about how the pacing, that you can't let it sag in the middle, and I obsess over it a little bit. It's not something that just sort of, I hope this works out. I really try to to think about that in the process of outlining and the process of structuring it, for sure.
Yeah.
So the fact that you think it worked out is great, because it's
definitely did for me. Absolutely.
I don't just hope for the best.
Yeah, I'm a speed reader. Like when I read, I always I say like I skim read or speed read. I read books really fast. And so because of that, I noticed when I became a writer that I would speed write. So like all my rough drafts are basically dialogue and like little action pieces, but no descriptions, no nothing in my rough draft. And so then I add that all in. And so when I go to that second draft of adding in, I feel like it's easier for me to make it fast paced because I wrote only those pieces so far. So I know like where to add. And then I'm really careful, like with the end of chapters, wanting to make sure I end it in a place that's like, you're gonna have to turn that page. So, yeah. But I feel like because of the way I write, I tend to actually, my rough drafts are really, really short, and even my second drafts. And a lot of times my editor's like, we're gonna need you to bump up the word count. I tend to write very fast paced anyway. I don't like to add anything extra. I want it to just be what's needed. And so maybe that's why it comes off fast paced. I'm glad to know that it works, because it definitely like takes a lot of drafts for me.
It totally works. I mean, both of them I think are just irresistible stories. And I would love to talk with you both a little bit about structure, because one of, I think, the big differences between these books, we've talked about a lot of similarities, you've chosen to structure them quite differently. Seraphina, in your book, you kind of begin with the discovery of a body and then backtrack and take a more kind of linear approach to telling the story. Amber, your book involves some different time jumps. You've got different focal points in terms of characters you're focusing on. So I would love to hear from both of you, from the beginning of your writing process, did you know kind of exactly what structure was going to be best suited to the story? What was that process like in terms of actually laying out the novel for both of you?
Well, for me, honestly, this book was very difficult. It went through a lot of drafts for me because I was having a really hard time with the structure. I knew the story I wanted to tell, and I was having a really hard time figuring out, like with When I Was You, it just flowed that way. But this one, I really had to take like 3 or 4 drafts to be like, this isn't working. Like I'm all over the place. It was jumbled. I also did write this during the pandemic, during lockdown. So my creativity wasn't quite there. So it did take a lot of brainstorming with my agent to be like, what is the best way that makes sense to a reader to tell this story? So with this, when we chose the structure, it was kind of like, how do we tell all these stories and have it all connected at the end with the least amount of confusion, because there's a lot of stories that are woven in. Yeah. And I think it turned out, I'm so happy with how it turned out. I'm glad we spent the energy to really look at it. So, yeah.
I think I love hearing how other writers have their process, because that's so interesting to me. I was listening to an interview with Sandy Jones the other day, how she's a pantser and she just does an outline. She just, and then I read her book and I'm like, how do you do that? That's great. It's amazing. I think about the 3-act structure. I think about Aristotle. I nerd out on structure. And I outline to an extent where I start with the ending and I write everything to the ending, and like wherever there needs to be, in the 3-act structure and natural reversal. And there's a chart. I have a chart, and so when I sit down to write and I'm on chapter 7, I know the bullet points that need to happen. I never just, that's the hard part for me. I think it takes more time to structure and outline it, and then I just sit down and write. But but I really don't have much revision. My first book, I sold the first draft and we had very little revision. And same with this, Such a Good Wife. I think when you do it that way, the drafts just, you kind of did a lot of the work front heavy. And so you're not revising quite as much. And all of, the way I hear people write, it's, you see them on Facebook, oh, do this math problem. I want to show your work, and how everybody's minds think about this math problem. That's kind of how it feels when you listen to other writers' process, and you don't think of yourself as even having a process. This is just how I do it. But the fill in the blanks kind of writing, like writing what you know and filling in the rest later. And I wish I could work like that, but no, I got spreadsheets.
I love it. I think it's so fascinating. I mean, I think just everything about the writing process when you're a non-writer is absolutely fascinating. So I'm so intrigued to hear all of this. And Seraphina, you mentioned kind of starting with the ending, and that was something that I definitely wanted to ask both of you about because, again, no spoilers. Both of these books have some shocking, dark, twisted stuff going on at the ends of the books, which I absolutely loved. And I was curious to hear if both of you knew from the outset of your writing process exactly how you wanted it to end. And Seraphina, it sounds like you did. So you began with the knowledge of exactly what you wanted the ending to be.
I think when you ask at the beginning about what was your inspiration, I think my inspiration was the twist at the end. Really start there and think about not, oh, this is messed up, let's form a whole story around it, but, just kind of thinking about, I don't know. I like a story where it's not just evil for the sake of evil or murder for the sake of somebody being crazy, but it really is satisfying because there's a reason behind it and it comes, kind of full circle and you go, oh, that's why. And I like to kind of think that through to start with. So I definitely have to know how it ends before I start at the beginning.
Yeah. And Amber, what about you?
Yeah, I did know, particularly the final twist on the final page. I had kind of known that about her. It was one of the main things I thought of going into writing the book. So I did know the ending. That particular piece never changed in any draft. So I was always kind of writing to that end. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was curious to know, I mean, like I said, there are dark elements in both of these stories. For you two as writers, do you feel like there's kind of a line that you would never cross? How do you judge, how much darkness is going to go into your books? Because I think it worked very well for both of you. And I feel like again, I'm trying not to spoil anything here, which I promise I won't do. The darkness felt very aligned with what we know about the characters, so it rang true in that way. But I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I don't know that I put parameters on it. I'm sure there is a line I wouldn't cross, but I don't know what that would be. I wouldn't know probably till I got there. When I start a book, I don't know if I wouldn't want to put a parameter on that. I would want to see where my character would go. And then obviously there'd probably be a place where I'd be like, oh, no. I don't know about that. But I think there's it's fun to just kind of let your mind go to I'm okay with going dark. And like Seraphina said, I'm okay with a lot of people saying her characters are unlikable or, oh, I didn't really like this book because I don't like the characters. That's fine with me. I'm okay with that. To me, that's almost like a compliment. It's well, I never meant them to be likable or no, I don't. I let them be who they're going to be and go as dark as they're going to go.
Yeah.
I get that. I think I don't enjoy any kind of gore or horror. I like thriller movies, but I don't go horror. And so for me, the psychological extent somebody will go to for things like blackmail and those kinds of things, I'll probably go pretty far. But as far as any kind of blood and guts and gore, it's not so much my thing. So I don't think I could really move easily into horror writing or anything like that. But yeah, you're right. But I'm writing book 4 right now. Book 3 comes out in the spring. And it's funny when we talk about our new book, I feel like I wrote it so long ago. I'm working on this. I gotta say, I'm going a little darker than I thought I would. So maybe that's a good question that I don't know yet. Maybe it'll go with each one. It'll push at it, a little bit further each time. I don't know.
I love it. So, I mean, I was going to ask.
I do agree with that, though. I don't love the gore either.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just saying I agree with her about the gore, though. That's a good answer because that's not my thing either.
Yeah, definitely. Both of your books are in that real psychological darkness kind of space, definitely. And Amber, I know you mentioned that you were working on this book during the pandemic, and I was going to ask both of you, how did your writing routines and everything change? Because I think I know it had a huge impact on all of us, working from home and everything. But I was curious to know for both of you, what is a typical writing day like for you? And did you find that was really impacted a lot over the past year? And Amber, maybe you could kick us off with this one.
Yeah, so I write for about 6 to 8 hours every day. And before it was nice because no one was here. And I just wrote all day, and I could move from room to room and have music blasting. And yeah, this last year's been tough. My daughter was going to school here in my house. My son for a while was here. He moved out a few months back, but he was here doing school at my house. My husband was working from home. He still is. So it definitely changed things for me, because I felt like I had to stay here in the office to be by myself, and then I couldn't just move around. You can't go to a coffee shop, so I couldn't even like go, I gotta go somewhere, you know? And I do feel like it was a harder year to be creative and to find my groove. And then, you know, even being interrupted, like my daughter wouldn't think anything about walking in and start talking to me, because sometimes writing looks like this. You know, just staring at the wall, and so everyone thinks, oh, mom's done. She's done working for the day. No, I'm really trying to figure out something for a scene. So, and then to have that train of thought always be interrupted with mom, da 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 da. Yeah. So it definitely has been a challenging year.
Yeah.
I love that. If I'm laying on my desk, under my desk on the floor, I'm working. Like that doesn't, there's not a lot going on. That's great. I was already working from home, my home office full-time for a few years. I mean, I teach full-time at university, but it's fully online, and it's a lot of just, you know, sort of grading papers and reading people's writing. So it's not like a schedule. So it didn't change that much as far as that. I mean, you know, for me, it's, my office, some Frank Sinatra, a candle, my dog in his bed. We're ready to start for the day. But it was still a weird year, because then you start thinking about debuting in a pandemic and trying to just get the motivation up. I remember I had a deadline for book 3, and it was when we had I'm in Dallas, and we had the big snowstorm. So we're out of power for 4 days. And, you know, it was like 30 degrees in the house. And we're sitting by, we made a tent over the fireplace with blankets, and we're just sitting, I'm still on my laptop because I had a deadline, like, trying to use the last of the battery power. And I'm thinking, I mean, when will it end? This is just madness after crazy time. So I think just emotionally, it's sometimes really hard to get yourself in that mindset. And it's a really specific, sort of headspace to be in. So it's good to see some light at the end of the tunnel with that. But even though the schedule didn't change, the mentality changed a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know our time is almost coming to an end here, but if I can ask one last question before we invite John back on screen. Now, this may be a little bit preemptive, because Amber, your book hasn't even been published yet, but I was curious if you are both, working on new thrillers, if there's anything you can tell us about, what your next project will be. And Seraphina, maybe you could take this one first, because I know you mentioned you have another book coming out in the spring.
Yeah, so the next book's called On a Quiet Street. It's a little bit different. My first two were one protagonist, first person, and this deals with multi-protagonist and different POVs. And it comes out May 17th, as far as I know, and I'm super excited about it. It was, for me, the funnest one yet to write. You start to get into a groove a little bit now that you've done a few, and so you experiment a little. So I'm really excited about it, and I'm, sort of just now outlining and forming this next fourth idea into something that's taking a little bit of a shape, but not quite there yet.
Amazing. And Amber, what about you?
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, Seraphina, because my book 3 has also like my book that was the easiest to write, the most fun, like it got me back in the groove. And it's called Winnie Came Back, and it comes out, I'm not sure, next summer, I think probably August, like how I've been doing, but yeah, it's basically about a woman who lives alone. She's a widow, and she is starting to have cognitive issues and thinks she has early onset Alzheimer's. She asks her estranged son to come live with her. Within a month of that, 2 women are murdered in her neighborhood, and she starts to suspect that maybe he's the murderer.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Well, I can't wait to read both of them. And I just want to congratulate you both on 2 very addictive and thrilling suspense novels. I honestly had so much fun preparing for this event and just getting to devour your books. And thank you both so much for answering my questions. And I think we'll invite John back on the screen here to see if we have any audience questions.
We do. So first, Susan wants to know, what author, living or dead, or any genre would you like to meet? Let's start with Amber.
Alice Hoffman. She's my favorite author.
How about you, Seraphina?
Man, I think James Baldwin, I would have to say. I think he's one of my inspirations for wanting to start writing and falling in love with books. Giovanni's Room is my favorite, still is.
How about you, Abby?
I'm going to have to say Agatha Christie. I feel like she was one of the authors, like so many crime readers. Her books really got me into crime novels. After Nancy Drew, I think I kind of graduated to Agatha Christie, and that would be amazing.
Awesome. So sort of going along with that, you can't name anybody else's book who is on the screen at the moment. That's always my caveat. What is something that you've read lately that you loved? Let's start with Amber.
I just finished reading We Were Never Here by Andrea Bartz, and I loved it. That was so great.
I just finished The Ruin by Derva McTiernan. I hope I say her name right. And I'm so glad it's a series because now there's more. And then some Claire McIntosh books that I've seen her name all over, and she's new to me, and I'm just so impressed and excited. Just her way of structuring a book and just her lovely style is great. So I'm glad there's more of those as well to devour soon.
How about you, Abby?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to give a shout out to 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard, which I actually was lucky enough to read a while ago now, but it just was published. I really loved that one. It's kind of a lockdown inspired domestic thriller, super tense and claustrophobic, really great story.
So you guys were talking a lot about domestic suspense. And I think one of the things that has to be, I think probably the hardest, well, probably not the hardest, I'm saying that as someone who hasn't had to write a book, but is coming up with a title for them. Because, they're usually on the shorter side. There's something that has to capture, kind of like tell somebody what the book is going to be, and something that hasn't potentially been used already. So can you guys talk a little bit about the process of coming up with your titles? Are they things that you just had in mind? Did they change throughout the process? Let's start with Amber.
So for When I Was You, I couldn't come up with the title. So one of my best friends, she's always beta reads for me, and she came up with it, and it was so great. And so then that has helped me with subsequent books because I used the same format. So then where I left her, I came up with the title the minute I came up with the idea because it just seemed so easy. With 4 words, she doesn't know that's where she left her. So
I always have a working title, and they usually change. Someone's listening. My first book stayed. That was the working title from day one, and it stayed that way. So I just thought that's always how it's going to be. But the publisher changed the second 2 books, and you know what? Bless them, because they know what they're doing and they know what's going to market. I think Such a Good Wife is called The Seduction because of all the, I'll give spoilers if I explain why, but I just sounded too romancy. And then I gave my 3rd book a working title, and I already knew it was crap. It was just going to kind of get me through writing it, hoping the publisher would come up with something better. So I kind of almost left it to them on that one.
It's always interesting to me to talk to authors who are like, they can't sit down and start writing until they have the title because, we know they change so often. So it always seems like such a dice roll to not be able to work on a book until you have the title, potentially knowing that that's going to change by the time the book comes out.
Yeah. I just needed to just have my documents all titled the same thing when I'm doing my nerdy spreadsheets and stuff, but I kind of don't get too attached to it. Really, I just assume it'll probably change. That's okay.
Yeah. So I asked about kind of what you've read lately that you love. So do you guys also kind of read in the genre to be able to kind of keep up with what's going on? And while you're reading, are you able to turn off the writer side of your brain, or are you trying to figure out the mechanics of like, this is the way the story worked, this is the way the story worked? How about you, Seraphina?
I read a ton of thrillers. I mean, I'm devouring them like crazy. I love reading them. I love being impressed by new writers, and I love it when I read something and go, damn it, I wish I had written that or thought of that, because you can read a handful and they're great. And then you read one that's just like, oh, wow. And I think part of me feels like I'm almost trying to figure out not what not to do in any sort of sense of writing, but what's already been done. Going into my first book, I hadn't read that many thrillers. I probably would have done some things differently, knowing the tropes that are used a lot now. So I don't necessarily think I try super hard to figure out the ending. I like to be taken along for the ride, but I notice when I do figure it out by, without trying hard, which isn't that often. I mean, there's some great writers out there. And so I just love I love the thrillers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I read a lot of thrillers, and I do try to figure out the ending, but I'm happy. I'm happy either way. If I figure it out, I'm like, wow, they really wrote that well for me to get all the clues. But if I don't, then I just love it because I love being thrown. But I don't really I don't necessarily read it to figure all the things out, but I do love to read and think about what the author did right. Like if I'm really taken for the ride or I can't stop turning the pages, I'll kind of go back and be like, what did they do that I want to make sure I'm emulating? Or if I'm stuck somewhere in a book that I'm writing, a lot of times just sitting down and reading a really great thriller will help me kind of get my brain like, oh, that's what I'm missing. Like, I don't have that piece yet. I haven't thought that through. So it's very helpful to read other great thrillers, I think.
Yeah.
How about you, Abby? What kind of reader are you? Are you trying to figure it out as you're going, or do you want to be surprised?
Oh my gosh, I'm totally along for the ride. I just love, I feel like for me, it's just all the experience, I just want to see where the author is going to take me. I feel like people are maybe surprised when I give that answer because I obviously read so many thrillers, but for me, the joy is just in seeing where the author is going. And, I think if I happen to figure it out, that's totally fine. It's not a huge disappointment to me or anything, but I think for me, the fun is just being along for the ride.
Yeah, I always feel like I should be way better at figuring them out because I work at a mystery bookstore and I've read mysteries almost exclusively for a decade now. And I'm always still like, oh yeah, I never would have seen that coming.
Totally, me too.
All right, so here we go. Here's another question. So who has been your favorite character to write? How about you, Amber?
My favorite character to write actually is in book 3. I wrote a character, Valerie, and I don't know what it was about her. I just really connected with her. I even had to take a break before I started writing book 4 because I kept trying to write her again. And I was like, no, this is a different lady. I just actually did my last round of edit yesterday on that book. And I was like, oh man, I just love her. And it's so funny. The way that I connected to her, but yeah, so she would be my favorite. Before that, it was Kelly 1 before that.
And how about you, Seraphina?
You know what? It's also book 3 that hasn't come out yet. A character whose name is Paige, and she just doesn't take crap from anyone. She'll hose down the mouthy paper boy, on his bike, and she'll break into the neighbor's garage just to try to find clues about, the secret she's trying to. She'll seduce your husband. She'll do whatever it takes, and she's a little bit more sort of brash, I think. Talk about unlikable. Went over the top with her. So I kind of dig her because of that.
So were either of you tempted to do series with the books that you're doing now, and if you weren't, do you guys have any little Easter eggs and stuff that connect your books kind of as a shared world? No, when I finish a book, I'm ready to move on to a new story and a new set of characters. That's an interesting thing to think because I have read a couple books. Oh yeah, it was The Maidens. When I read The Maidens and he had referenced something from The Silent Patient, I was like, that is so cool. I've never thought of doing that. So it is something I haven't thought of. It would be a cool thing to connect them, but I don't know how I would do that with mine. So I'm not sure.
Same. I feel like I'm so over them once I'm done. I'm really ready to just meet some new people and create a new scenario. I think we have discussed a little bit, maybe the story idea I'm working on now has the potential for the protagonist to kind of solve other mysteries, maybe potentially, but I don't know. I love the standalones. I know most people love a series because who doesn't? If you love something, you want more of it. I totally get that. But I've always loved the standalones. I want to write like that, and I also like that.
I think one of the great things about domestic suspense having this huge moment is that I think it's really taught people to appreciate the standalone novel. Some people were like, I want series. And I love series too, but they're so daunting to know when can you jump in if it's a long series, things like that. So I think one of the things about domestic suspense kind of having its moment is, like I said, really appreciating people being able to pick up that one book where you get to have that experience and then you're done and you get to move on to the next one.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so I think we are close to time for the evening. So Abby, I know you asked them already what they've got coming up. What do you have coming up next on Crime by the Book? I know you do really great author interviews too, so who are you chatting with next?
Oh my gosh, I feel like my brain is going to go blank right now. I've got some exciting Instagram lives coming up though in September. I feel like I'm like kind of crazy booked at the moment. We're going to be talking with Amanda Jayatissa about her amazing debut novel, My Sweet Girl, which you all need to read. It's absolutely incredible. It's so, so good. I'm going to be doing a virtual event with Catherine Dang. Her debut thriller, Nice Girls, will be out in mid-September. It's also fantastic. So I've got lots of exciting stuff coming up in September, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Awesome. All right. So for anybody who might have joined us late, we have been chatting with Seraphina Nova Glass, whose book, Such a Good Wife, came out on August 10th. And we've been chatting with Amber Garza, whose book, Where I Left Her, comes out next Tuesday. As I mentioned, we've got signed book plates to go with both of them. The best way to support our authors this evening and Murder by the Book, of course, is to buy books from us. We've dropped links for buy links in there, though we do understand that sometimes people are curious about books and have come and found us. Maybe you picked up the book somewhere else. So if you've enjoyed the event tonight and you want to support the store, but maybe have already picked up the books, we have created a tip jar on PayPal. So I'm going to drop the link in there if anybody wants to do that. But as we said, we hope that you'll come to the website, check out staff picks, buy a book from us. That's definitely the best way to do that. But we wanted to thank Abby so much for leading the discussion with us this evening, and Amber and Seraphina. It was so great to meet both of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
You guys all have a good night and take care.
Thank you.